Okay, but Hashem Yisbarach, we're starting today's daf is Kufyut Gimel in Chulin. We're continuing the discussion about cooking things and blood and all these geschmacka stuff. So we're really handling in the middle of the mice over here between Rava and Shmuel. So what we were talking about over here was that Boy Minei, that Rav Mar Baruchel Imlach lebasar shchuta bad lebasar treifa. Rav Mar Baruchel salted shechted meat with treifa meat. Asal came to Rava, and he came to Rava. Amalei Rava said to him, Hatameim. Hatameim is a pasuk in Parsha Shmini about shratzim, that there's an extra hay in the word. What's the extra hay for? Less or tziran v'roitvan v'kiba shalahan. To asa the juice that comes out and the sauce that it's cooked in, and the pieces and the spices that get stuck on the bottom of the pot. Okay. So once we see that the juice that comes out of it is aser, then the basar that's also the basar shachut is also going to be a problem when it gets mixed together with the basar treifa, that it's going to be absorbing blood from the treifa. So Kufid Gimel Amud Aleph, the top of the Amud V'leim Shmuel, but let Rava say to him that it's also on the basis of Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel said Malech Hareu Kareisech V'Kavish Hareu Kamavushal. That which is salted is like that. It's hot, like the Gemara said earlier on Tzadi Zayin Mid Beis, and we mentioned it again on Kufir Aleph and Kufir Beis. And that which is pickled is like that which is cooked. Meaning Shmuel said that salting is like roasting, is in effect that just as when kosher and non-kosher meat are roasted together, the heat causes the juice of the non-kosher meat to be absorbed together with the kosher meat. So too kosher and non-kosher meats are salted together. So why didn't Rava explain it from here? So Zakti Gemara like this: Even the Shmuel, if he would have resolved this question on the basis of Psak of Shmuel, have Amina Hanimili Daman, I could have said that this ruling of Shmuel is relevant only with regard to the dam, which is aser, Aval Tziran V'Rod Tolai, but not with regard to the juice in the gravy, which might be permitted. Meaning, what Shmuel said was that a kosher piece of meat salted together with the treifa will absorb the juice of the treifa meat. But who is to say that the juice is aser? It could be that the juice is mutter. We mentioned this when we started off the sugya. So Kamash Malan, therefore Rava teaches us otherwise by bringing the brisa, which teaches that the juice and the gravy of non-kosher meats are aser also. And since juice is sticky and more easily absorbed than blood, the juice of Isser does penetrate into the kosher meat, even while the kosher meat is spitting out its own fluids, and will make the kosher meat aser. So, in fact, the Gemara Meisvei, we have a brisa like this, which is going to be a kasha on Rava. Dog tahar shamalchim, dog tame mutter, a kosher fish that was salted together with a non-kosher fish is mutter. My lav sheishnei maluchim. Now, is this not referring to where both cases were salted and still the kosher fish is mutter, even though the juice that the salt takes out from the non-kosher fish will get mixed together with the kosher fish? And we see, not like what Rava said, that even juice is not absorbed by meat that's still in the process of spitting out its own liquids. Dr. Gemara, no. The brisa might refer to a case where the kosher fish was salted and the non-kosher fish was unsalted. Tafel over here with a taf. Tafel means unsalted. In that case, the unsalted non-kosher fish is not spitting anything out. But if both would be salted, then the kosher fish would absorb the juice that's being spit out by the non-kosher fish, even though the kosher fish is in the process of spitting out its own juices, as Rava said. And certainly the kosher fish would be aser if it was unsalted, since it's then not spitting out anything that might be thought capable of spitting out the juice of the non-kosher fish. But from that which the end of the brisa says, if the kosher fish was salted and the non-kosher fish was unsalted, it's going to be mutter. So, if this is what the Sefer the Brisa is saying, we can imply that the Brisa's first part that we're talking about, where both fish were salted. So, it's like the Gemara, no. It might be that in the later part of the Brisa, the Tan is not saying a new halacha, but it's simply explaining the first part of the Brisa, and we would understand the Brisa as follows: Tahar shamalchim dag tame mutter. A kosher fish that was salted with a non-kosher fish is mutter. Ketzad, how so? Meaning, when does this halacha apply? When the kosher fish was salted and the non-kosher fish was unsalted, then it will be mutter. Meaning, the Brisa's explanation is necessary, so the person shouldn't think, as a simple reading of the first, as Rachel the Brisa might suggest, that the halacha refers to where both were salted. Hochanami mistabra, And it's also more reasonable to say that the Seif of the Brisa is simply explaining the Reisha of the Brisa. The Isal Kadatach Reisha Shnei Maluchim, if you would think to say that the first part of the Brisa deals with when both fish were salted, and the Brisa is saying that it's mutter, then what would be the point of the Brisa to say the second part? I mean, if the kosher was salted and non-kosher was salted, it's mutter. Hashta Shnei Maluchim Shari. Now, where both fish are salted, so that the non-kosher fish is certainly spitting out juice, and then the kosher fish is mutter, as we taught in the first part, according to how we're understanding the Brisa now. So tahar maliach with tamei tafel mabayit. It's necessary. Is it necessary for the Brisa to then teach the seifa that where the kosher fish is salted and the non-kosher fish is unsalted, that the kosher fish is going to be mutter? If the first part of the Brisa means that the kosher fish remains mutter even when they're both salted, so then it would be extra for the Brisa to then teach in the seifa of the Brisa that the kosher fish is mutter when that's the only one that's salted. So what are we talking about? So this l'chayra proves that the seifa of the Brisa means only to explain the circumstances of the first part. If your raya is on the basis of this argument, then you don't have anything. Meaning it might be that indeed the first part, meaning the ratio of the Brisa is matter the kosher fish, even where both are salted, and this that you're arguing that the seifa of the Brisa is then extra, I can say the Tana seifa l'gluya ratio. The Tana said the seifa in order to clarify the meaning of the ratio, meaning the late tamer ratio tahar maliach v'tamei tafel. So that you shouldn't say that the first part refers to where the kosher fish is salted and the non-kosher fish is not salted, and it's only then that the kosher fish is mutter. Aval shnei maluchin aser, but where both fish are salted, the kosher fish will taka be aser. So then Tana seifa tahar maliach v'tamei tafel. So Kedei that we shouldn't make this mistake, the Tana says in the Seifa, a separate halacha, the kosher fish being matter the kosher fish, where the kosher fish is salted and the non-kosher fish is unsalted, machlal the reisha shnei maluchin, to imply that the first case deals with a different case where both fish were salted, vafilu hachishari, and even in this case, the kosher fish is still going to be mutter. So the Brisa admits either interpretation and neither proves or slugs up what Rava said. Okay, the Gemara wants to continue with this a little bit more. Tashmami Seifa the Seifa. Let's bring a ride from the last part of the Seifa, which says, Avlamaya Tame Maliach Vitar Tafel Aser. But if the non-kosher fish was salted and the kosher fish was unsalted, it's Aser. Tame Maliach Vitar Tafel Huda Aser. Now this clearly implies that it's only the non-kosher fish is salted and the kosher fish is, if the non-kosher fish is salted and the kosher fish is not salted, that the kosher fish is going to be Aser because the salt will make the non-kosher juice leak out and go into the kosher fish. But where both are salted, the fish are going to be shari, are going to be mutter. Because the kosher fish does not absorb the juices, the juices of the non-kosher fish when it's in the middle of spitting out its own liquids. Zok the Gemara, Aidi the Tana Reisha, Tahar Maliach, V'tamei Tafel, Tana Nami Seifa, Tamei Maliach, V'tahar Tafel. In fact, it might be that the kosher fish is aser even when both are salted, and the reason why the third part of the Brisa, which is asering the kosher fish, is taught with regard to a case where the kosher fish is not salted, since the Tana teaches in the Reisha that the kosher fish is mutter when the kosher fish is salted and the non-kosher fish is not salted, a case in which only the one fish is salted. So Tana Nami Seifa, Tamei Maliach V'tar Tafel. For the sake of linguistic symmetry, meaning that a lot of times we have this in the Mishnayos and Brisas, that we want that the way that it's I don't know how to describe this, but a lot of times when you have a rhyme, you need to have the sentences need to be a certain length in order for them to match up. So you want the ratio of a seifa to match up. So how do we match it up? So we were talking about one fish. We want the seifa, the Brisa, to be talking about one fish. Also, we want it to match. So Tananami seifa tamei maliach v'tar tafel. For the sake of the symmetry of the language of the Reish and the Seifa, the Brisa should match up. He teaches also in the Seifa, in the third part of the Brisa, a case of Isser, in which only one is salted, where the non-kosher fish is salted, and the kosher fish is unsalted. But the Tana would definitely agree that the kosher fish is Asr, even if both were salted, so you don't have a Raya either way. Okay, now we have a Siman Bisra, the Monach Nafkusa, meat that is placed, departing. Okay? These are three halachas from Shmuel that the Gemara will now discuss. It's interesting when we get up to Simanim of the Gemara, the concept may come from a Gemara Erevin, that the Gemara says that right? And the sima befihem, so the Gemara says, "Al tikri sima befihem el simanim," because they na terah niknas el b'simanim. So when we have a chance to make simanim to memorize things or to put things in a certain order, so we'll do that. So that's why we have simanim in the Gemara. Okay, so meat cannot be cooked until all the blood is drained from it, as we explained earlier, that there's dam evarm shalai pirish and dam evarm shapirish. So Shmuel discusses the salting process used to drain meat of its blood. So Amar Shmuel gesagt, ein abas yetzi midei damai elim kein molchai yafe yafe. Meat is not drained of its blood unless one salts it very, very well. Meaning, that one must spread so much salt on the meat so that the entire meat is covered with salt. If any part of the meat remains uncovered, the salting process will not be able to drain all of its blood. Or it means that it must be salted so strongly that the meat cannot be eaten with the salt. According to the second shot, which is the Rashba, as long as the meat's inedible on account of its salt, the salting will drain all of its blood, even if it was salted only on one side. The meat that's salted very well must be left in a kli that has holes in it for 18 minutes or an hour, preferably an hour, during which time the salt will drain the meat of all its blood. Again, this is something fun because this is not something that we typically do on a regular basis. It'd be something more that our babas did. Okay, umedicha yafa yafa, and then you have to rinse it very well. Although the salting extracted all the blood from the meat, the salt which sticks to the meat is now fully saturated with the blood that was extracted. And on top of that, although most of the blood that was extracted was already drained through the holes in the kli, some of it can stick to the surface of the meat. So if one were to cook the meat immediately after salting it without rinsing it, the cooking would cause the blood that's absorbed in the salt and that's on the meat surface to become reabsorbed in the meat. So you have to wash the meat off very well before you cook it. Okay. Itmar we learned. Rav Huna says, Meileach umeidiach. A person has to salt the meat and then rinse it. B'masnisa tana, we learned in the Brayso, meidiach umeileach umeidiach. You first rinse the meat and then you salt it and then you rinse it again. You have to soften it prior to salting it, and you wash it by doing that. If the meat wasn't washed first, the surface could become dry and hard, and the salting will not be able to take out the blood. The water will absorb into the meat, will make it softer, and make it easier for the blood to take out the salt to take out the blood. Rav Huna and the Brayso are not arguing. This Rav Huna said that you're meileach umeidiach, which doesn't mention, Rav Huna didn't mention rinsing the meat before you salt it. It refers to where the meat was rinsed by the butcher, which in that case, the customer, the person buying it from the butcher, does not need to rinse it again before salting it, meaning Rav Huna agrees that the meat must be rinsed before salting it, but he did not mention this because in his city it was a common practice for the butchers to wash the meat before selling it to the customers, and it was unnecessary for the customers to rinse the meat before salting it. While the Brayso is referring to where it was not rinsed by the butcher. Okay, so the Gemara Meiser Rav Dimi Rav Dimi of Nahardo was salt the meat with thick salt and then shake off the salt. Since he used thick salt, he had to shake off the blood saturated salt before washing the meat after the salting. When thin salt is used, the salt could dissolve on its own, and it's not necessary to shake it off before washing the meat. It's interesting that the Rashba brings a Ravid, and it's also mentioned in the Torah and Siman Samech Tes, which is the exact opposite of what we just explained, that thin salt sticks to the meat and it's not removed through a simple rinsing. Rather, it must be washed and rubbed forcefully. Rav Dimi therefore purposely used thick salt, which would not stick so strongly to the meat, so that the salt and the blood could be removed while shaking it off and a simple rinse. Okay, obviously there's a lot more to see here, but we're going to skip it. Rav Hashashia said, "In Mexican dam we do not assume that the presence of blood is in the kishkis." Tirgama, what do we mean by this? Akarkasha uma'aya v'hadra dekanta. This is talking about the rectum, the stomachs, and the large intestine. So what are we talking about over here? The Gemara will soon define what it means, the kishkis. Therefore, if the kishkis were cooked without first being salted, they do not become aser. Okay? The me'ayim in the Lashon HaMishnah refers to all inner kishkis, including the heart, the lungs, and the liver. However, the Amiram use this term differently. The me'ayim that we're referring to over here includes all the stomachs and the rest of the intestines. the other Rishonim say it's referring to only the intestines, the real kishka, and not the stomachs, because some of the stomachs have blood in it. But as we know, a lot of the stomachs contain the gases and all kinds of other yucky things, so we're not necessarily going to use them today. Today we, fine. Now the Gemara goes on to the second din of Shmuel, which is in the Siman de Monach. Omar Shmuel said, "Ein menichem basar melech ela al gabe kli menukav." You could place salted meat only on a kli that has holes in it. When meat is salted to extract its blood, it must be placed in a kli that has holes in it, so that the extracted blood can flow out through the holes and doesn't collect in the vessel. If, however, it's placed in a kli, the extracted blood will gather in the keli, and when the meat finishes spitting it out, it will reabsorb the blood. Some say that if it doesn't drain out automatically, it goes right back in, and so you got to be careful when you do that. Rav Sheshes malach le garma garma. Rav Sheshes was sold to meat piece by piece, no more than one piece at a time in a kli. Because if we salted two pieces together, each piece would absorb the blood that's being spit out by the other piece. Trey my time alone. What's pshat? He didn't salt two pieces together. Because they're concerned that the blood gets spit out from the first piece and the other piece absorbs it. By the same token, even when salting one piece by itself, we could be concerned that maybe the blood gets spit out of one side and gets absorbed by the other side of the same piece of meat. Rather, there's no difference. Just as we're obviously not concerned for this in the case of a single piece salted by itself, so too in the case of several pieces salted together. For as long as the meat is in the process of spitting out its own fluids, it does not absorb other meat, not from itself and not from the other pieces. Omar Shmuel, which is the third member of Shmuel, Nafkusa. Omar Shmuel Mishum Reb Chia. Shmuel said, "Name Reb Chia Hashever Mafrakta Shalahem Akodim Shetese Nafsha." One who, after shechting an animal, breaks the animal's neck before the soul departs. Haresa Machbid Esabas of Goizla Sabrius. He makes the meat heavy and robs the people, umavliya dam be'evarim, and causes the blood to be absorbed in the limbs. What are we talking about over here? So when an animal is shechted, the blood rushes out through the throat. If one breaks the animal's neck prematurely, the animal has no strength to groan and discharge its blood. So the blood that was rushing out then remains inside and absorbs into the animal's meat and limbs, adding to their weight. So when the butcher sells the meat by weight, he's overcharging and robbing his customers who assume that they're paying for meat, not blood. Very, very interesting zachin over here. So they asked the question, what's Shmuel saying? Is he saying that he makes the meat heavy and robs the people because it causes blood to be absorbed in the limbs? But if he does it for himself, it's fine, meaning because he's only cheating other customers. But if a person would want to do that by himself, there's no isser involved in breaking the neck of an animal this way. Or perhaps it means to say that for himself it's also asr. Let this question stand unresolved. Meaning, perhaps Shmuel means that there is but one isser involved when breaking the neck, meaning robbing the customer, and it has nothing to do with any isser of dam or isser of trephus. But it may cause it that the avarim that you're going to eat are going to be saturated with blood, and it won't come out through salting properly, which will make the meat usr to eat. Okay. Fine. Ad kan this Gemara, and now we come to a Mishnah, a very short Mishnah. That is, it's a total of one line in the Gemara. But back to the Shmuez of Basa B'chalav. Hamayla as ha'oif imagvina ala shulchan. Any over place to say a person brings up bird meat with cheese on the table is not over on a loisa say. This halacha is actually unnecessary for itself because the Torah only says that it's Basa B'chalav. And we had a shmuz at the beginning of the parak where we discussed the isser of chicken, that it's only papashtus, according to most, it's only an isser d'Rabbana. Okay, so Zok the Gemara, so we're saying that if you put it on the table, you're not over say, meaning that if you eat it, you will be over say. So shmamina basar b'chalav deraisa. So we can see from here that eating birds together with milk is asr midiraisa, which would be fakart from what Rabbi Kiva said. Because this mission is coming to go against what Rabbi Kiva says, who holds that the isr deraisa basa b'chalav is only for domestic animal meat, but not to birds. Okay. So the Gemara wants to take that, and the Gemara says, "Ema hamala sa'if magvina ala shulchan, ene bali de loisa say." But maybe the point of the mission is as follows: that a person who brings up bird meat with cheese on the table cannot come to be over on a loisa say. Meaning, if he brings them up together, there's no concern that he might eat them and be over an Issa Deraisa, because even if you were to place them into a single hot pan and eat them together, he won't be over the Issa Deraisa of Basa B'Chala. Nevertheless, they may not be brought together to the table due to the concern that he may come to bring meaning if you're eating chicken meat, then you'll say, well, what's the difference if I eat chicken meat or I eat cow meat? And you might end up with problems over here. Okay. Adkan this Gemara. Now we go on to the next Mishnah. The Torah tells us 3 times, you should not cook a kid in its mother's milk. The Gemara later on learns out from these psukim that there are 3 distinct isurim. Number 1, cooking meat and milk together. Number 2, eating meat and milk that were cooked together. And number 3, being nana, getting hana from meat and milk that were cooked together. The Gemara actually brings different rayas, different makaris for these isurim. However, the generally accepted makar is from what we're talking about over here. The Mishnah discusses the types of meat and milk included in these isurim. Bisar behemet tahir b'chalei behemet tahira, meat of a kosher animal that's cooked with milk of a kosher animal, also lavashal. It's forbidden to cook for asbana, and it's forbidden to benefit from it. The Tana is teaching that the issur pertaining to meat and milk applies only to kosher animals. Basa b'chalav of non-kosher animals are not included in the issur basa b'chalav, and would be mutter to cook such a dish and to be nana from such a dish as well, as the Mishnah will explain. The issur against eating basa b'chalav, though not mentioned by the Tana, also applies only to basa b'chalav of kosher animals. Okay. Basa b'hemet tahira b'chalei behemet tahira, or meat of a non-kosher animal with milk of a kosher animal. Basar behemet tahira b'chalei behemet tmeya, meat of a kosher animal with milk of a non-kosher animal, or Bisar behemet tmei b'chalei behemet tahira, or meat of a non-kosher animal with milk of a kosher animal, mutar l'bashal, is permitted to cook, mutar b'ana, and it's permitted to benefit, because neither the meat or the milk of non-kosher animals are included in the basa b'chalav, as the Gemara will explain. The taruvis is obviously aser because it's non-kosher, but not because of the isser of basa b'chalav. Rabbi Kiva says, Chayav ha'oif eina min ha'Torah. Wild animals that are kosher and bird meat are not aser with milk min ha'Torah. Rabbi Kiva argues on the Tanakama, who excludes only the meat of non-kosher animals from basa b'chalav, and maintains that the meat of birds and chayas are not going to be nichlal in the isser basa b'chalav min ha'Torah. The Torah says, three times, which includes the meat of undomesticated animals, which is a chaya, fowl, and non-kosher animals. That's the 3 times that the Torah mentions is coming to be to exclude these 3 things. First, we exclude birds, which is not a behema. A chaya is also not a behema, and the word gedi also excludes non-kosher animals. The meat of other kosher animals, such as cows and sheep, however, is included in the Isser min HaTorah. Rabbi Yossi Glili says, Nemar, Pasuk says, Le'seichlu kol nevela, you should not eat any nevela. Nemar, and it says right afterwards, you should not cook a kid in the milk of its mother. So the fact that these 2 psukim are put together is like this: Esra asum shum nevela, meaning anything that's subject to the Isra of nevela, also lavasha b'chalav, is forbidden to cook with milk. Aifsha asum shum nevela. Now regarding birds, which is subject to the Isra of nevela, yachli also lavasha b'chalav. It might have been thought that too is forbidden to cook with milk. Tamalem, the pasuk says, you should not cook it in the milk of its mother. Which excludes birds that have no mother's milk. So it's a shaila how to understand and how to read the psukim. Zakti Gemara. The Isser Basa B'chalav is introduced in the Torah with respect to a gedi, a kid, and its mother. Our Mishnah, however, does not limit the Isser to goats alone, and the Gemara addresses the Makar for this din. So, how do you notice how do we know that this term, L'Shavasha Gedi, also encompasses other animals as well? Amr Belazar said, Amar Kar the Pasuk Shteit, by Yishlach Yehuda as Gedi Ha'izim, Yehuda sent the Gedi of goats. Amr Beis, Kan Gedi Izim, Hakamakam Shem Gedi Stam, Afilu Parvarachal B'mashma. Now, when the Pasuk says Gedi Izim, it's understood to be exclusively referring to the kid of goats. But anywhere else in the Torah where it says Gedi without specifying that it's Gedi Izim or not, so it's coming to include even the offspring of a cow and a sheep, which are also implicitly understood in the term Gedi. The fact that the Torah found it necessary in the case of Yehuda to modify the term Gedi, that saying that it was a Gedi Izim, indicates that when it says Gedi in general, it encompasses the young of all domestic animals. And we mentioned this a couple of times with Shem Rashi in Parashas Emor, but here we're seeing it in the Gemara Alein. Leilif minei, and let's learn from this pasuk that just says here the term Gedi refers to a kid of goats, so to wherever the Torah says Gedi it refers exclusively to baby goats, meaning, let's learn out from Gzeir Shavat that just as the word Gedi said in the pasuk of Yehuda refers specifically to Gedi Izim, so to the word Gedi with respect to Basa B'chalav should be Gedi Izim. But the Gemara says, no, we have another pasuk that says, Ves Eires Gedoye HaIzim. With the skins of the kids of goats, she covered his arms and his smooth skinned neck. This is talking about how Rivka dressed Yaakov to resemble the Hiri Esav and received the brachas that Yitzchak had intended to give Esav. So, Kan Gediye Ha'izim, this implies that only here where the Torah specifies the kids of goats, Gediye Izim, it's understood, specifically referring to Gediye Izim. Hakam Lakam Shnema Gedi Stam, but anywhere else where the Torah says Gedi, it's referring to all of them. So then again, meaning all the animals, I feel a par mashma, even the offspring of a cow and sheep are implicit in the term Gedi. So we could learn out Gzeir Shavat from here as well, that the term Gedi refers to goats. So wherever the Torah says Gedi, it's exclusively referring to Gediye Izim. These two constitute two psukim that come together as one, that teach the same concept. And we know that the din is any two psukim that come as one cannot teach a common halacha to other contexts. Now, the rationale for this is as follows. Now, we always try to explain the mahalach of drashas in the Gemara, and some people find it boring. Some people, just tune out when it comes to these things. But it's kedai to get a good tfisa on these things, because then we know how to really darshan Torah Shabbat with Torah Shabbat Peh. Is commonly found throughout Shas, and the svara for it, the understanding is as follows. There's a general concept of binyan av, which says that a rule or a halacha stated by the Torah with respect to one area of Torah serves as a prototype for all other areas of halacha. Where, however, the Torah mentions a certain halacha in two areas of Torah, it's evident that the Torah didn't mean for this rule to be applied to the other areas of Torah, because then it would have sufficed for the Torah to say this rule in only one case. So whenever you have a halacha in two different places, obviously it's coming to teach me something else. The fact that the Torah stated the rule explicitly in the second area of Torah indicates that this specific rule was not meant as a prototype for other areas. Rather, the Torah intends to convey that it applies only in the individual cases where the rule is said explicitly. Okay, and that's the cheshbon of what we want to do with the Gemara over here. So talk the Gemara like this. Now this answer of Shnei Ksuv Mapam Kechet Ein Melamdin is only going to be good according to the Manda Amar, who says that Ein Melamdin, that you don't use this to learn. But Ela Lamandi Amar Melamdin, according to the Manda Amar, who says that two psukim could be teaching Chiddush, Michael Amemer. So how are you going to, what are you going to say? Let's learn from these two psukim that the term Gedi Taka means with respect to Basa B'chalav, L'shavasha Gedi B'chalev Imai, would refer exclusively to goats. Zak the Gemara Trem Yutik Sivi. Two exclusionary terms are written Izim Ha'izim. In both psukim, the Torah could have written goats, but instead wrote Ha'izim. So when it says Ha'izim, so vastos, that the extra hey serves as an exclusion, indicating that the word Gedi is only to be interpreted as a Gediya Izim in these two cases, but not elsewhere. Okay. Fine. Weiter the Gemara darshans the pasuk of Le'savasha Gedi B'chalev Yimai. We mentioned in the Mishnah that the pasuk Le'savasha Gedi B'chalev Yimai is mentioned 3 times throughout the Torah. The Gemara explains the word Gedi and B'chalev Yimai in these psukim. Amar Shmuel Gazak Gedi. The word Gedi that's mentioned in the pasuk Le'savasha Gedi B'chalev Yimai, L'Rabbis es hachelev, to include the chelev under the isser, meaning that from cooked chelev, which are certain fats that are usher for consumption by the punishment of kares, with milk and he ate it, he's chayav for being over on both the chelav and basa b'chalav. Gedila Rabbah says Amesa, and the word Gedi is also going to include the meat of an animal that died without shchita, and Gedila Rabbis as Hashlil. And the third time the word Gedi is mentioned in the Torah is to include the meat of a fetus that's found inside a geshachtene animal. The extra mention of the word Gedi teaches that any kid, even a fetus, is going to be usher with milk. Gedi lahaitzias hadam. And the word kid, the Gedi, is also mentioned to exclude dam from the Isser. Gedi lahaitzias hashilya. Meaning, what's it coming to be? Remember, now the Gemara is saying what it's coming to be mimayit. Gedi lahaitzias hashilya. The word Gedi is mentioned to exclude the placenta. Hashilya is the placenta from the Isser. Gedi lahaitzias hatmeya. The word Gedi is said again to exclude the basar of a non-kosher animal from the Isser, as the Gemara mentioned previously. The Torah says you should not cook the goat in the milk of its mother, to teach that the Isser applies only to the meat in the milk of a mother, and not to meat in the milk of a male animal, which is interesting. I guess they had the concept of male animals having milk. And where would this come from? Meaning, if a male animal developed udders and produced a small quantity of milk, it's not going to be nichlal in the Isser of Basar V'chalav. Now, the Shach in Yeridea and Simon Peizayin handles whether there's an Isser D'Rabbanan against cooking meat with milk of an animal that is a Zachar that is producing milk. Okay. B'chalev Yimai v'le b'chalev Shchuta. Again, the pasuk says B'chalev Imai, and not in the milk of an animal that was ready geshachten. The milk of its mother implies the milk was extracted from the animal that's fit to be a mother, to the exclusion of an animal that's shechted, that's no longer fit to be a mother. An animal that died naturally or was killed without shechita is also included in the Isser, which was sort of mentioned before in the Gemara. B'chalev imay v'le b'chalev tmeya. And when the pasuk says b'chalev imay the third time, it's coming to teach you that it's dafka in the milk of its mother and not in the milk of a non-kosher animal. So the milk of a non-kosher animal is not subject to the Isra Basa B'chalav, even in the case of the meat from a kosher animal. The Gemara says that the word Gedi is written the pasuk mentions the word Gedi 3 times. We have 3 psukim, we have 6 drashas. So what do we do? Says that Gemara, what's that? What's the mahalach over here? Meaning every time the Torah says, meaning we need one pasuk to teach me the ikra adin, and then l'chayra we have 2 other places which we could darshan. So how do you have 6 drashas from 3 words in a pasuk? So Kosavar Shmuel Isser Chal Isser. Shmuel holds that an Isser could take effect on a pre-existing Isser, Isser Chelav v'Mesim Echad Kornafki, and therefore the Isser against Chelav with milk and the Isser against basar of an animal that died without shchita are learnt out from the same pasuk. Dam nami lav gedihu. Blood too, the Isser of eating dam is excluded without the need for a pasuk because it's not a gedi b'shilya nami. And the shilya also pirsha b'almahu. It's extraneous matter, and there's no need for the pasuk to exclude dam and the shilya from the basar b'chalav because there are no grounds to including them in the Isser. So pashu lahu trey. So therefore, the 2 mentions of Gedi remain available for the drashas. Chad l'Rabbah says Hashlil, one to include the fetus, v'chad l'mutabeim etmeya, and one to exclude the meat of a non-kosher animal. Now, since Shmuel mentions that one of the psukim of Gedi to teach me the Isser Basar B'chalav to take effect on the pre-existing Isurim of Chelav and Avela, it follows that this should be a binyanab for all the other Isurim mentioned in the Torah, and they too should take effect upon the pre-existing Yisur. Meaning the fact that Shmuel says over here by Basar B'chalav that the concept of Isser Chal Isser should work. So we want to know, does the concept of Isser Chal Isser work on other things as well? B'savar Shmuel Isser Chal Isser, but does then Shmuel hold that Isser could take effect on a pre-existing Isser, and we'll say that should be the case all across the Torah? V'amar Shmuel Mishum Rebbe Eliezer, Shmuel said, in the name of Rebbe Eliezer, the Shaila Rebbe Eliezer, Rebbe Lazar, whoever it might be, but minayin l'koyin tameh she'achal truma tameh she'ein b'misa. How do we know that a koyin tameh who ate truma that's tameh, that's not mechuyev misa b'dei shomayim? A person who eats truma when he's a non-koyin, if it's b'shegig, so then he's got to pay a karam b'chaymish. If it's b'mezid misa b'dei shomayim. Now we hear the Kain's Tameh. Says he, Chayiv Misa B'dei Shamayim. Shenam, the Pasuk says in regard to a Kain Tameh who eats Truma, Umesu Baiki Yechalaluhu, they should protect my Kodesh and not bear a sin and die because of it, for they will have been Mechalalit. This excludes the penalty of Misa, this case of Truma that's Tameh, because the Truma is already defiled before the Kain Tameh eats it. By saying that the Kain Tameh who eats Truma is Mechuyev Misa B'dei Shamayim for being Mechal the Truma, the Torah indicates that the Truma Tameh, which was already Mechulal before the Kain ate it, doesn't carry the punishment of Misa B'dei Shamayim. The Gemara understands that the underlying reason for this Torah is due to the fact that Truma Tameh is previously forbidden to be eaten, as learned out by the Gemara in Yavamas from an implication of the Pasuk by Abachar B'Sharecha Teichelenu. You should eat it, which is expanded to Aser, the consumption of Truma Tameh by a Kain that's Tameh. Therefore, the Misa B'dei Shamayim, carrying an Isser against the Kain Tameh eating Truma, does not take effect on the pre-existing Isser against eating Truma Tameh. So therefore, a Kain Tameh who eats Truma Tameh is only over on the Isser against eating Truma Tameh, but does not carry the Misa B'dei Shamayim part of eating Truma. So it would come up from here that the Isser does not take effect on. So we see from here l'chayra that there is no. We cannot say that there is Isser Chal al Isser. So prat l'zu shem chulalas v'aymedas. This excludes from the penalty of death this case of Truma, which is Tameh, as we just explained. Or we could say a different answer. Be'alma Isser Chal Isser. In general, Shmuel holds that regularly Isser could be Chal on Isser. V'shani Haslam, it's different here with the case of a Kain Tameh who eats Truma Tameya. The Mit Rachmana Umesu Boy, because the Torah explicitly excluded Truma Tameya from the Isser against the Kain Tameh eating Truma with the Pasuk Umesu Boy. Why? What's the answer over here? Which indicates that only Truma Tahira, which is presently becoming Mechulal, makes a person's Tameh who eats it be Mechuyev Misa B'dei Shamayim. But otherwise, there wouldn't be Isser. Not there wouldn't be Isser, but there wouldn't be Isser Chal al Isser. Ibay Yisema. Or you could say the Alma Kasava Shmuel Ein Isser Chal Isser. Or we could say that Shmuel holds Taka, like we're used to saying that Taka Ein Isser Chal Isser. V'shani Hachad Rabbi Rachmana Gedi. And over here with Basa B'chalav, it's different because the Torah is Marba Chelav and Avela in the Isser with the extra word Gedi, which is mentioned 3 times. Shmuel holds that the Torah teaching that the Mesubai Kichalu against the Kain Tameh eating Truma does not take effect on pre-existing Truma Tameya, and that would serve as a binyan for all these Surim teaching that they too did not take effect on, meaning the same way we find that meaning it's dafka by Truma Tameya, not elsewhere, and the Ritaka don't have a binyan for other Isurim. Or we could say that the statement to Shmuel that says that Pasuk B'chalav reflects Shmuel's own shita, that Isser Taka is Chala and Isser. But Rabbi Eliezer, who he said the memory from in regard to Truma, is what Rabbi Eliezer's Rebbe holds that the Isser does not take effect on Ein Isser Chal al Isser. And again, you would have to know if this Rabbi Eliezer is Tana Amayra, like you mentioned before, the Mefarshim handle who this is exactly and how it should work. Okay, Dr. Gemara Baita Bamine Rav Achta Bar Ami Merav. Rav Achta Bar Ami asked Rav, what's the halacha concerning a person who cooks meat in the milk of a female gedit and did not yet nurse its young? So what's the difference? The term gedi is being used here in reference to the mother, as opposed to the way the pasuk uses it as a reference to the children. So maybe the Dikduke Sefer says that maybe you should say gediya over here. But either way, an animal that has never given birth before, but is presently in the late stages of her first pregnancy, has already developed milk. So does the term B'chalev Yomai denote that the Isser applies only to the milk of an animal that was previously a mother, meaning it didn't get a chance to be a mother yet. So Zak Gemara Amalei, Rav said to him, from the fact that Shmuel found it necessary to say the B'chalev Yomai B'chalev Zachar, that the milk of its mother, B'chalev Yomai, teaches, but not in the milk of a Zachar. That's only regarding a Zachar, which will never come to the category of being a mother. So that milk will be excluded. But regarding this female that did not yet nurse its young, it came to Balachlal Aim. Also, since it will eventually come to the category of a mother, the milk is also with meat, and it's included in the Issa Deraisa of Basa B'chalav. Itmar we learned, Chaylev B'chalav, a person who cooks Chaylev with meat, Rav Ami Ravasi One says you get malchus, and the other one says you do not get malchus. What's the machlekes over here? Lamada maleka kasavar is a chal al iser. Umanda omar ein eleka kasavar ein iser chal al iser. Let us say that the machlekes says that the one who says that you get malchus for being over on the iser against eating basar b'chalav holds that it iser is chal al iser. So even if you have chalav, it's chal on the iser basar b'chalav. But if you say you're not leika, he obviously holds that there is no iser chal al iser. Rashi explains that according to the Shita, chalav is not excluded from the word gedi, like the Gemara tried to say before, because gedi is needed to teach the basic meat with milk of basar b'chalav. As far as excluding chalav from the repetition of the word gedi, Rashi explains that according to this, one mention of the word gedi is needed to include a uber into iser basar b'chalav, and another gedi is needed to exclude the shilya from the iser. So no pasuk is available to be mamayit chalav, which would be faked from what Shmuel said about the shlil, and that it's only milsa b'alma, this extraneous matter, does not require a pasuk to exclude it. No, we can't say that. It's not necessarily true. The kuli alma ein iser chal iser. Really, everybody holds ein iser chal iser. Achila the kuli alma le pligi. For eating chalav that's cooked with milk, everybody agrees that there's no malchus over here for being over on the iser of basar b'chalav, because the pre-existing chalav prevents the iser of the pre-existing iser of chalav prevents the iser of basar b'chalav from taking effect. Ki pligi abishul. When do they argue with respect to getting malchus for basar b'chalav? When you cook it. Manda amar loika chad yisuruhu, manda amar einei loika, because lahachi afker achmana la'achila b'lashon bishul. The one who said that he gets malchus holds that since in regard to cooking there's only one iser of basar b'chalav, and there's no iser to prevent it from taking effect. I mean, like all other isurim, the raisa basar b'chalav, the chalav is not asur for cooking. So when you cook it, there's no other problem it's not going to take away the iser of basar b'chalav when you cook with it. The Manda Amar who says that you don't get malchus lahachi afker achmana la'achila b'lashon bishul. It's for this reason that the Torah expresses the Isser about Basar b'chalav in terms of cooking, to say that Kevin the alachila leilaki abishul nami laki, that just like when you eat chalav cooked with milk, you don't get malchus for Basar b'chalav, so too you do not get malchus for cooking Basar b'chalav when you cook them together. Okay, count.